Hi there. Thanks for tuning in and choosing to listen to this bonus Not the Top 20 podcast. It's something that we'd like to do regularly throughout the season, and it is a discussion, a conversation with Daniel Storey. Many of you will know Daniel from being a writer for inews.co.uk, the iPaper, and as being one of the most passionate football writers that exists, in my eyes anyway, and crucially for us, someone that takes the EFL incredibly seriously, continues to do so, and takes telling its stories very, very seriously. Hi, Daniel. It's very nice to have you on the pod.
Thank you very much. It's a big intro to live up to, so thank you.
Well, you've kind of brought it upon yourself here, mate, because, we all have ideas over the summer. When you take a bit of time out, you have a bit of a rest. That's when the creative juices flow the most, at least in my world. But not all of the ideas end up coming to fruition. Particularly and generally, the most extreme ones get either scrapped or, at the very least, diluted. It's not been the case for you. You have taken on something quite absurd this season, but also one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing the 92 in a single season, and I'm in the process of that. I should say that I laid the groundwork accidentally, but very smartly, by originally pitching this in the 2022-23 season, which listeners will remember had a 5-week World Cup in the middle of it. So I was definitely trying to bite off more than I could chew at that point, and that point was firmly made to me. But then when I went back this summer and said, well, there isn't the World Cup this year, so how about it? Somehow it landed. And to be fair, it landed because we do quite a lot of EFL coverage, and I like to think we do it quite well, and that there's an audience for it. So if you're going to do that, why not let's supercharge it?
I think, to start with the why and then learn a bit more about the how. As you say, you have been consistently covering EFL stories and doing so in some depth for some time, but 92 of them, 72 EFL stories, plus one for each of the Premier League clubs as well. The workload is going to be pretty intense. I'm interested to know exactly why you have decided to take this on.
Firstly, the positive angle of this is that I adore EFL football. I adore live football. I adore football planning and spreadsheets and organisation and thinking about where I might be on a Tuesday or a Saturday in April when I'm in August. So managing to marry that with what, I have a full-time job, and this is being supported emphatically by my employers, and all power to them for that, because they believe in the project. They believe that by not just going to the games, which kind of ties it in as an idea, but I think more importantly is writing unique features on each of those clubs. And some of them will evolve from the matches, and some of them will be more tenuously linked to those matches. But there are so many fans out there who I think feel, and you know this from the brilliant work that you and George do, is that it's not that they feel ignored, they just feel that there's such a focus inevitably on the Premier League and the top end of that Premier League, that important things get missed, whether it's young players, whether it's managers developing, whether it's ambitious or negligent owners, whether it's clubs on the rise or fall. Those stories deserve to be told, and I think when you do it, there's a gratitude that you get, which is incredibly heartwarming. I've always said, the best thing you can hear in this job is someone say, you wrote about my club and nobody's really said it like that before, and you got us, you got it, you got to the heart of it. That's what we all want. We can't all do it all the time, but this project gives me a really good chance to do it more often than not, I think.
Yeah, in your mission statement piece upon launch of the project, you calculated that you need to average 5 live games every fortnight. Of course, there'll be times where it's busier than that, and probably times where it's slightly less busy. That just yet. How many games have you been to so far?
So on the morning we record, I am between Watford, which was game number 10, Watford-Plymouth last night, and Colchester-Brentford this evening as I record, which is game number 11. Inevitably with this, you have to front load the season, because The ideal is you get to February and there's, let's say, 18 Saturdays left in the season, and you have 18 League One or League Two clubs left, because you can't guarantee their games being moved to a Sunday or a Monday or a Friday or a Thursday. Now, that might happen, and if it does, great. I also suspect that if that happens, my employers might knock on my door and say, do you fancy doing a bit of Champions League now that you've got some free midweeks? And we'll come, I'm sure I'll get to that. But yeah, you have to front load it. And so August, September, October are going to be very busy in terms of live games. And as a kind of to repeat what I mentioned, the live games is the easy bit, albeit with quite a lot of travel. The issue is if you're interviewing Danny Cowley at Colchester and the only day he can do is 2 days after you've been to a Colchester home game, you then have to go back to Colchester again to do that and then come back. And that's where the calendar and the spreadsheet gets slightly icky.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, you are already known, I would say, for being someone that really embraces things like spreadsheets, things like interactive maps of football grounds, and it's nice that you've managed to tie all of that together. But as you say, the most, I'm very jealous. I'm completely in awe. As a friend, I'm also a little concerned for you going forward and your capacity to live life as well as doing the 92 for the iPaper for your job. But, it is just the 2 hours that you spend at each ground that is the bit that I'm sort of most jealous of. The breadth of experience that you will have over the next 9-10 months is going to be just incredible. And for all that we spend a lot of time waffling about all sorts of things to do with football, as well as the football itself, it is what happens on the pitch on a match day in the ground that is still, the thing that gives you that jolt of electricity. So I note that already you have had two of the greatest EFL experiences in terms of atmospheres. I don't want to upset the Leeds fans, but by that I mean you've been in an angry Elland Road already, an angry and packed Elland Road, and a joyous Hillsborough too.
Yeah, Hillsborough was the first assignment of the whole project. I was interviewing Danny Roll a couple of days before the game. We decided we'd kind of start with that interview and that game. And inevitably, over the course of these 9 months, there are going to be times where I'm really nervous, depending on who I've interviewed and when I've interviewed them and what the piece is going to be. If you're writing a piece about Danny Roll's chaotic, kind of high-tempo football, and then they lose or draw 1-1 with Plymouth on the opening day, it all feels a little bit of a dance group. You have to kind of slightly readjust. But they were brilliant. They won 4-0. There is also a weird kind of inevitability of this job that once the team is done, because I'm not going to see any team play twice at home, once that team's done, you almost have to try and part them a little bit. So now Sheffield Wednesday have lost a couple, and I'm like, I feel a bit sorry for them, because I feel like I've already done my bit by trying to upsell that football, and I'm sure they'll be fine this season. They will, like last season, they will lose games heavily. Like they lost 4-0 at Huddersfield, didn't they? And we're still brilliant at the end of the season. I think that'll happen under Danny Roll. But yeah, that was a joyous experience on the opening day. Beautiful blue sky, beautiful Hillsborough, packed. Which I've actually not been to Hillsborough, and I don't think that busy before, just because of where they've been at under Chanceria Tau. So yeah, that was brilliant. And then the second game, as you say, was Leeds.
The game that I've been to at Hillsborough was also on a sunny August, and it was Villa's first game back in the Championship. I went with my mate who's a massive Villa fan, and exactly as you describe it, I can picture that so clearly. I can picture how I felt when Hi Ho Silver Lining played, which both teams sing their own version of. And I think that is, for me, still one of my top 3 footballing experiences, live footballing experiences, certainly within the EFL. And equally, having not been to Elland Road a ton, but on the occasions that I have been there, feeling like I was in a pretty special place. All being well, and as long as you agree to it, we'd love to check in with you regularly here, because we know that those who listen to the pod, as well as George and I, are going to be following this pretty closely. You are going to have a few nerdy readers, who will start tracking the results of the home teams and working out whether you might start to be considered a jinx, I'm afraid, because that's just what happens. And it should be said before we get into some more meaty topics that you can find all of this on inews.co.uk. A Google search for that plus Daniel's story, you can't fail to find what you're looking for. So do make sure that you are, like us, reading and just gobbling up everything that Daniel's doing this season, because it is so exciting, and we're going to be able to talk to him on the pod as well. I'd love to start with Bromley, actually, who you visited ahead of the season, because, and I think it was a lovely way to start, as you made the point in your piece, unique in the EFL this season, in that it is their first ever Football League campaign. And I can only kind of imagine the sense of anticipation, apprehension and excitement that you must have kind of felt when you went to visit. I'm going there on Saturday for the first time, and I cannot wait. Give me a flavour of Bromley. We've spoken about Leeds and Ellen Road, of Sheffield Wednesday and Hillsborough. This is at the other end of the spectrum.
It is, and you realise that from the moment you walk down to the stadium, and you are literally walking past a little stables with horses and a little country road, and then there's a gym complex on the left, which is nothing to do with Bromley. It's privately owned, and then you get this little ground, and that sounds patronising, but it isn't, because they're incredibly proud of it. They have invested. Robert Stanton Gleeves invested a huge amount in the infrastructure of that club. As you go inside the main building, when you go in the reception, you can then go through there, if permitted, upstairs, and you can see the player breakout room, the restaurant, the kitchen where they've got the chefs employed. It is championship standard, no doubt. And I've been to championship clubs that have got worse facilities than that at the complex, and it is all in one, the training ground and stadium. So it's a brilliant setup, and yet on match day it combines with this emphatically family feel, non-league feel. One of the things that the football operations lead was chatting to me in an interview at the club. He was saying one of our biggest headaches this summer is that at Bromley, normally fans are used to standing at one end and then at half time walking round and standing at the other end, because that's a kind of, that's a trait of non-league football. And we've had to keep repeating to them that they can't do that this season. They're going to have to stay in one place to watch the game. So it was emphatically non-league. They are also, they look smart under Andy Woodman. I know they have now lost, but to start with 2 wins in the league is, they were a bit, not fearful, but just had no idea what to expect. Obviously, there's a trend now of National League promotees being certainly able to consolidate in that league, if not better. But I think they are probably, if there was going to be an exception to that, they might suspect that they could be it, given the budgets. But no, it's a joyous experience. I hope it's sunny, because you're basically in the sun everywhere at that ground if the sun's out, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting on it ahead of last weekend, that their away game at Bradford City, who are the team in League Two with the largest fan base and the highest capacity and one of the biggest grounds. I'm probably going to sound stupid here, and that Bromley fans will tell me it's ridiculous, but you could make a case that that's their biggest ever league match, or at least regulation league game outside of playoffs. And I was so sad about the early red card that they received, because I genuinely, from what I'd seen so far in the first 2 league games, that they look excellent. They look excellent, and they look like the style of play is probably quite non-league, and yet incredibly effective. Not bad to watch at all, because it's effective. That means they take a lot of shots. That means they defend well. I think it's always worth pointing out that I think any style of football that involves your team taking a lot of shots and scoring goals is pretty exciting. And I don't always agree with, whether long passing or short passing equals bad and good, etc. So I find them really interesting, and their manager Andy Woodman has left quite a strong impression with how bullish he's been and almost refusing to look happy at any point so far, despite their strong start. But having read your piece, I would love to know a bit more about what the owner, Robin Stanton-Gleeves, is like, because he comes across in your piece as a very strong character, quite very confident, and understandably so, in his way of doing things and Bromley's rise under him. And he's got a few kind of interesting approaches, I guess, that I hadn't seen specified to that extent before, including quotes from your piece where he says, "I don't believe in spending the budget on players." That pretty much falls foul of what every other EFL club does with their budget. And then 3 rules that he told you he imposes when it comes to new players. One being they must not have had a significant history of injuries, because he says they can't afford to carry long-term injuries. Makes sense. Lovely idea, that. They should live locally. Makes sense. Lovely idea, that. And outfielders must be comfortable in at least 2 positions. When I read that, I thought, am I comfortable with an owner being so open about, or so involved with a club's recruitment policy? And yet then when I thought about it further, everything he says is making, like, it makes sense. I understand what he's saying.
Yeah, and he is he's an incredibly honest, transparent guy about the process in the club and about himself. He openly says, he's not a football guy. Cricket is his first love. But when he was given the opportunity through selling one of his companies to invest in Bromley, he decided he was going to do it as a kind of community entity, and that meant investing in infrastructure over players. You can tell it almost pains him to talk about spending money on a player that then may leave in 2 or 3 years, or may be injured for 6 months. He's like, well, what am I getting out of this? So he has invested in the infrastructure, and his mantra on that is that if we attract players to this club, it is not because of how much we pay them. It's either because they've got something to prove, or it's because they think the facilities can improve them. And if both of those things happen, I think they will be all right in League Two this summer and this season. Their recruitment is... Look, if they finished 23rd in the league and they were a bigger club, people would say it was non-ambitious, I think. But I suspect there's just a trust there between owner, manager. The other thing he talks about is how the members of staff have normal employment contracts. They don't have they're not given any special deals, so that and they're not connected to each other, so that if the manager leaves, then the assistant doesn't have to necessarily leave, and the physio doesn't leave, and the kit man doesn't leave, and they're all their own entity. Because he says you shouldn't be working for each other, you should be working for Bromley. So there is a huge, that kind of family mood in the club is led by him. He's a very relaxed guy. He joked about the playoffs and the final at Wembley, and the camera kind of panning to him, expecting him to be sort of singing and dancing, and he was just sat there calm. But I think we'd all say that owners in the EFL are far more likely to go too far the other way than they are to be too calm. So that in itself is a fairly nice change.
Yeah, for sure. I really want to, fully believe in the project, in what he's saying, and in its kind of sturdiness. I guess the sort of cynic in me, having never covered Bromley before, and therefore not fully understanding the specifics of the club, but having covered many, many other teams of all shapes and sizes, of all different approaches, is that it's, not to diminish the success that they have had, which is incredible, that this is the highest league they've ever been in. They have created something amazing. It's just the cynic in me that wonders, it is much easier to explain and justify your decisions when things are going well, and then it gets a lot harder because you win promotion, you reach higher levels, I'm just interested to see how they will do. I'm confident they will do really well this season. It's season 2, it's season 3 that clubs like Sutton United, who came up with a broadly similar, I think, mentality and approach, and an understanding of themselves, and a trust in what they were doing. And then I guess even, a team like Harrogate Town, for example, might be feeling a similar thing of how long can that last? Do you hit a bit of a ceiling? And, I want to believe in the mobility of the pyramid, and I want to believe that a club like Bromley, like Burton Albion, for example, could make it all the way to the Championship, with a bit of luck and a fair wind, and with this incredibly strong sense of themselves and kind of not losing track of that. And yeah, I can't wait to go on Saturday. It's going to be brilliant. I mean, the sort of angle of the piece is, or one of the other angles of the piece, which is something that was spoken about a lot with Sutton United, is what clubs have to do when they come up from non-league to the EFL. Particularly in terms of the different regulations, a lot of that to do with the ground itself, the matchday experience, which you've kind of touched on a little bit already. And it can come with quite significant costs as well, not just one-off costs of building different stands or new stands, but also loss of earnings when it comes to things like artificial pitches which get used by the local community. And these are the sorts of topics that you write really well on, because these are the sorts of topics that I always find it hard to have a strong opinion on. It doesn't feel very fair on a case-by-case basis, but I suppose the EFL would probably put forward pretty good reasoning for having the strict regulations that they have. So can you talk a bit about what the feeling you got was at Bromley? Did it feel like it was all a bit of a ball ache and a bit unfair, or were they just sort of, cracking on with it?
I think the ball ache element of it is heavily caveated by the fact that everyone was incredibly excited, and I think probably still is incredibly excited about the reasons for them doing it. I think if you were having to do these sort of things, having gone down a division, there would be a hugely different feeling about doing them than if you're rising up to the EFL to do them. I mean, it's been chaotic this summer in a good way. There's a guy, Matt Hall, who's the football operations guy, and he's also was the program editor, and he's also the stadium announcer, and he's also, doing every job under the sun there and needing 10 arms and 15 legs to do it, because it is a small club and it will need, I think, further investment probably in that staff if and as they stay in the EFL for longer. But yeah, as you said, in terms of the pitch, they did have an artificial surface. They did have to move it. It made them £500,000 a year through being able to use it as a community asset. So the club had no choice but to lift it piece by piece and move it to the back of the stand, so where it can still be used as that, albeit not on a match day morning, which was a big thing of their non-league experience. And those sort of jobs are just, they're so myriad. And even even you and I, never mind supporters, just have no concept of just how many jobs there are. Matt's talking about, I need to look at fixture arranging. I need to look at, there's a new, now we're in the league system, we have a new system of drug testing and where every player is. We have to look at, they went on their first ever foreign pre-season trip to Portugal. So somebody had to arrange that, and that was him. And there's just so much that goes into then being an EFL club, and not just being an EFL club, but one that wants to show the best of itself, because it would be very easy to say we'll do the bare minimum and hope to survive in our first season and then kick on. But as you say, with teams like Sutton, it's very hard to do that. Almost your first season has to be the benchmark.
And actually that leads me on to what I'd like to talk about next. Your I was going to say your most recent footballing experience, but you were at the Watford game in the Cup on last night, on Tuesday night. But on Sunday, you were in South Wales at Swansea, Cardiff. And there's a small link between what we just talked about with Bromley and what we'll talk about here, in that there is an imposition by authorities that has quite a big impact on not the club in this sense, Swansea and Cardiff, but its fans, in that Swansea Cardiff, the South Wales derby, one of the fiercest in the UK and in the world really, is rather the only bubble match in British football. I mean, what does that actually mean?
I mean, the most extreme case is that it means that a Cardiff fan in West Wales, of which there are plenty, and I met several before the game on Sunday, cannot drive the hour to Swansea park up their car half an hour from the game or get a train in and walk to the stadium. They have to drive past Swansea to Cardiff to then get an official supporters coach, which every single Cardiff supporter does. And if you live in Cardiff, that's probably not too much of an imposition. If you don't, it really is. So then you have to get on one of those supporters coaches, go to the game where you're then led straight into the ground. There's black netting over the fences. You can't even see a home fan, and a home fan can't even see an away fan. You stand in the ground for 2 hours singing until the ground fills up and the game starts. And then after the game, you're immediately put straight back on those coaches, which you have to return travel by, back to Cardiff, to the Cardiff City Stadium car park, where you pick up their car, and in the case I use, drive 2 hours back to West Wales. And it just seems, it's something that's been happening for 27 straight years in this fixture. So it's the longest permanent bubble. And I can see why it happens for exceptions. So it happened for Newcastle Sunderland last season in the FA Cup because the allocation was 6,000 and it was the first fixture in a while, and they thought this is the best way to manage that. And I can sort of accept that. But having it as the hard and fast only rule, to my mind, seems fairly archaic now, albeit there were some dissenting voices on that opinion.
Yeah, that's what I found interesting. I got a sense that there were some fans, and we should remember that within any fan base there are going to be people who are going for entirely different reasons to one another and have different interest when it comes to a match day. I did get a sense that there was one or two people that you spoke to who broadly thought, on balance, the avoidance of any scenario or circumstance where there could be fighting, unrest, whatever you want to call it, that can affect people who don't want to take part in that, was broadly on the side of that being okay in order to avoid that sort of thing. But it's so hard to, I would like to think that I broadly believe that things would be fine, but unrest at football matches does happen quite regularly, and it's not the average fan that takes part in it, but there are groups probably from every single club in the country that would be quite up for a scrap. So it's another one of these, the thought-provoking piece for me, really, because you present the information, you present differing opinions, and I always sort of think, well, I can see all sides here.
Yeah, I think there's two things to say. Firstly, one point that those wishing for the bubble to end would say is that British football is arguably the most prolific football nation in the world for fierce derbies. Bring in Scotland as well, and you can have a very strong case for that. And other games in which there has been unrest, and probably is still from time to time, managed to avoid that. And the second thing, which is certainly what struck to me, is that it seems like the continuation of it happening almost makes it more likely for it to carry on, because the longer you leave it, the bigger deal you make of it. This started in 1997 after 4 years of away fans being banned from the game. But between 1999 and 2008, Cardiff and Swansea didn't play each other. So if in that 9-year interim, that 9-year hiatus, the clubs have come together and formulated a plan for this to happen bubble free, I think we would be in a good situation now. But the fact that it's carried on from 2008 to 2024 means inevitably, the one thing that those voices who thought it maybe should carry on were saying, well, yeah, but just imagine it. And that's the point. Like, imagination is the problem, because it's built into such a big thing that first release would feel, I suppose, to those who were intent on causing trouble, would feel like the first day of school holidays in that terms.
Yeah, and then ultimately, any situation where fans and human beings are really being, and adults are being treated like, whether it's school kids that can't look after themselves or animal cattle, really, is being transported in that way. It doesn't feel great, does it? It's a really interesting facet to one of my favourite derbies, and there is that aspect of, like, there are loads of really fierce derbies and none of the others have this situation. So I think ultimately that's probably where where I end this. So just saying, if that is the case, I understand the specific context that you've talked about and the history behind it, but I kind of think bringing it in line with other derbies would make more sense. But it was a really interesting, really interesting kind of way of covering the big game on Sunday. And Leeds United, you've spent some time with as well. Leeds, who are, whether people like it or not, one of the main characters of the EFL, probably one of the main characters of English football, given their history, their fan base. And reading your piece, it becomes clear why. Because within one article, there's just so many different angles that you manage to get across all in one go. And if you'd ignored any of them, you'd have been ignoring quite a big part of the Leeds story. But it's ridiculous, isn't it? There's just so much all the time.
It's just, emotional baggage FC, isn't it? It's just, it is, it's an incredible tale, really. And look, we know as football supporters that there's this kind of black humour, pride in misery that supporters of every club feel is in some way innate to their club, and we all have elements of it. But yeah, boy, at Leeds, do they have that? And it goes right through history. I think ultimately Leeds is a club that even in their best times have either been a prelude to them falling away or a prelude to other big English clubs doing what they did better. So they reached the European Cup final in 1975 and then begins a period of English dominance. They win the league in 92, but then a Premier League forms and they immediately don't feel a heavyweight part of it. They get to European Cup semi-finals and then the whole financial system of the club collapses around them. And they've still not recovered from any of those. And each one of those seems to pile more and more kind of on this emotional Jenga tower of supporting Leeds United. And I am of the mind that they will eventually get it right because they have to, I think. But what makes them further interesting this season is that the investment from Red Bull, which is only 10% at the moment, but we don't know where that leads, means that even now there are many supporters of which I spoke to who that even if now they do get it right, if Red Bull have got their autograph all over that, it will feel different, and it will feel. There's a guy, Rob Conlon, who writes the Square Ball, who I know well, and he's a great Leeds writer, and he says we went through all the rubbish. And we finally got told under the new era of 49ers ownership that we were on an even keel, that we could do this on our terms. And just at the time we get told that and start to believe it, after last season and the 90 points, suddenly Red Bull come on board. And it's like, well, I could understand Red Bull coming on when we had no money or when we had no owner wanting to be involved. But it seems such a weird time for it to happen now. And it will inevitably watermark some of what happens if Leeds do well. And it will certainly have an emotional impact if they don't do as well as they'd like.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be, depending on the personality of an individual fan, there will be many Leeds fans, I imagine, who will say they are a business that owns 10% of the club. They have lots of money and they'll use it to make the team better, and that's what we want. And if it didn't come from them, it could come from many other sources, some of which are equally or more unpalatable. But I find it really interesting, the psyche of the Leeds fan, just as passionate about the club's results, who is also able to, feel that unease at the invasion's the wrong word, the addition of this brand, which, as you point out, and as Michael Cox, who I've worked with a lot for The Athletic, has always been at pains to point out when people kind of talk about Red Bull football, and it's how synonymous Red Bull has become within the European game in particular, is that it's not the energy drink itself, it's the company involved. I think I'm right in saying is essentially a marketing exercise for the energy drink. Well, I don't really understand that situation, but that is, it feels a little uneasy.
It does, and I think it would do at any club. in English football simply because of the traditions and the social institutions we're talking about. You know, the whole reason for doing this project is because every club is unique and has got a story to tell, and therefore any erasure of that tradition and history, I think, should be seen as a bad thing, whoever does it. With Leeds, certainly from a Leeds supporter perspective, or a majority, I think, would say this, is that if it's one thing to go through all the bad times, and I'm avoiding swearing here, but because it's worse than bad times, but
Yeah.
if it's one thing to go through all of that and then have it, but then if you do make the best of yourself and you've done it on what you foresee your own terms, you think, well, there was the vindication. Like, here's the emotional release. Here's the relief of everything. That I think they're certainly one of Rob's biggest fears now is that they will get it right and it still won't feel quite how they wanted because there is this new partner in. And look, again, it's 10%. It's at the moment, it's the only difference really is just shirt sponsorship, and it's a pretty good deal for championships for shirt sponsorships. And we will see if that progresses. But it's one to keep an eye on, because I'm not sure Leeds fans can take another bolt-on of weird emotional turmoil right now.
Yeah. And you selected the people that you spoke to for the piece really well. I think Leeds fans as a homogenous group get a bad reputation outside of around the EFL, and I'm generally at pains to point out how I see it with Leeds fans and Sunderland fans is that I don't find that on average a Leeds fan or a Sunderland fan is any more ridiculous or hysterical or caricature as any other fan of any EFL team. It's just that there's so many more of them.
Yeah.
That, for example, just in my little world, we hear from more of the Leeds fans and we hear from more of the Sunderland fans, and some of that messaging is critical in its nature. And so you can get to a point where you feel Leeds fans are too much or Sunderland fans are too much, and I don't believe that at all. It's just the volume more than anything, I think. But I thought the self-awareness of Daniel Chapman, who you spoke to as well, who owns the Leeds website Leedsista, to say, look, all of the history and everything that goes into the Leeds United fan mentality, he said, creates a siege mentality that defines Leeds in rebellion against a world that hates Leeds. At its worst, though, it becomes self-fulfilling and self-destructing, because we oscillate between wanting to be successful and wanting to retain an identity made from not being as successful as we should have been. I don't know what a contented Leeds fan would look like, because contentment does not feel very Leeds. Thought it was really, fascinating piece about a team that, as I say, is already one of the main characters of the EFL. So to be able to kind of parse it all so nicely, particularly having watched them lose 3-0 at home in the Cup, was really great. And the last thing I'd like to touch on today, that you've done a kind of change of tune, really, and kind of to show the breadth of how you're approaching this topic, not just looking at owners, not just looking at the on-pitch stuff or managers or tactics, whatever, but with Notts County, you kind of got involved in some of the work that they're doing in the community, which is a massive part of every single EFL club's being, and a massively underestimated, I think, and under-discussed and underappreciated part of what clubs do.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. It's a sad state of affairs, but it shouldn't be the foundation of an EFL club, in this case Notts County. It shouldn't be them thanking me wholeheartedly for writing about their work. It should be known. It should be shouted from the rooftops. My kind of vaguely optimistic hope is that supporters, if they ever need to rely on their club as a social institution, as something outside of Saturday and Tuesday, then they would think to do so and would assume that their club would be there. But I'm actually not sure that's the case. I heard from the piece I did was about their care program, which is offering sessions for those within the community, not just Notts County supporters, who are at any stage of their cancer journey. So are either preparing for surgery or recovering from it generally. And it provides exercise and it provides social interaction. And I heard from Notts County supporters the next day when the piece was out that said, "Oh, I didn't know about this." And that's a crying shame. And it's not the foundation's fault because the budgets are only so big. It's not the club's fault because there's 1,000,001 things they have to do. And it's certainly not the community's fault. But we have to find a way of people respecting a club, not just for, oh, they lost 3-0 at home, or they're going down this season, so everything's going badly. Maybe if a club gets relegated from League One to League Two, but also helps a couple of hundred people in their community going through a cancer journey, maybe there's some sort of, karmic balance we can find there. Because it was an incredibly inspiring morning.
There are always amazing things to visit. I was very fortunate in my last job, in fact my only job apart from this one. I was involved in making some of the videos for the EFL Awards, and particularly there are multiple community awards and things of that nature. And so there was a couple of years where I would spend most of February and March traveling across the country with a cameraman and spending days with those who'd been nominated for awards, and kind of spending time getting involved and trying to cover as best we could in 2-minute VTs what they were doing. And it was incredible, honestly. Still think about it all the time. Some like the creativity of the projects and the programs that clubs are doing, but also the amount that clubs share with each other about what they're doing in order to help each other do better and do different things. The breadth of ways in which clubs make an impact in their local community is just incredible. Last year's EFL Awards had a few nominees that I think, again, it's just worth trying to highlight what we mean when we talk about this stuff, because for a lot of the listeners, they, as you say, they won't have really thought about it that much, sometimes even with the club that they support. I mean, West Brom were kind of in the EFL Awards last year. Their programme that they put forward has impacted or has had 13,000 participants. So that's like half of the whole stadium on a match day being supported, helped in different ways. For Charlton Athletic, bearing in mind, they're in a densely populated area, 25,000 people that are involved in some way with their community trust. And their community trust employs 131 permanent staff. Like, that's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me, as well as more than that, who are sort of casual staff and volunteers. Bristol City have had a project called ADD Mentor, where they worked with young people who'd been involved in drug dealing, antisocial behaviour, crime, and I think it's 6 young people like that per year that they work with. And after 2 years, police reports showing 100% non-engagement with antisocial behaviour for each mentee. So that is, for now, lives being heavily improved and kind of turned around by what Bristol City are doing in their community. Port Vale and Morecambe also had incredible campaigns. Port Vale literally just having a place for people to come and have a cup of tea and a slice of toast, and qualified people there to give advice and support with things like housing benefits, mental health issues, employment issues, as well as just giving some company to people in the local area. And I think they had 6,000 visits over the year. And Morecambe, who do a monthly coffee morning just for the veterans community in Morecambe and the surrounding areas, which again just provides that sort of that community for a group of people who in many cases need support, and I dare say in many cases will find it difficult to find elsewhere. So I thought, I was really pleased that so early on in your journey you'd done something like this. And I guess it's difficult for you now because you will want to do more things like this, but every single club will have an appropriate story to tell on this front, and also there's so many different types of topics you want to tackle too.
Yeah, there is, and I it's a duty. It has to be my duty not to get kind of surrounded and suffocated by the inevitable Saturday, Tuesday, Sunday nature of having to fit in 5 games and 5 pieces every 2 weeks. Because if we get to the end of the season and I haven't told enough of those stories, or haven't told the best, the wrong word, but the some of the most valuable of those projects, then I haven't done my job properly. I'm glad we started with that community initiative at Notts County, because it jumped out to me purely because it's something I hadn't heard of before. They, as you mentioned, Ali, they have since, they've been in touch with other clubs. They now know of other clubs that do something similar. So, and that's how this stuff builds. And, we talk about the football family and it becomes a cliche, but in that sense, it really is, in that sharing of information about how to help make people's lives better. But yeah, I have to do more of it. I will do more of it, but it's finding, if you can find time to go and watch a match, or you can find time to go and interview a manager, you can certainly find time to go and spend time with, Burton Albion's dementia morning or equivalent, because it doesn't matter if people, if they're the pieces that people read more. It doesn't matter if they read as much about that as they did about Leeds United. Probably not, but that's not the point. We're doing this as to offer a complete encapsulation of what the EFL and the 92 with the 20 Premier League clubs means. And to do that, we have to represent the whole picture.
It's definitely a good time to mention that you have explicitly said that you would like people to be reaching out to you to put forward what they consider to be the story, and if they're able to help you in some way with that, then that's something that you've genuinely asked for. And I think your Twitter DMs are open. I've no doubt on the inews.co.uk site there are ways of contacting you as well.
Yeah.
So that is definitely worth hearing for those listening to this, because you've got a lot of clubs still to cover. Thanks so much for agreeing to chat us through what you're doing, and I hope that for you it'll be a nice way of kind of extending the work that you're doing, given it's must be such a busy schedule and a quick turnaround for you. You have to turn on to the next piece so quickly. Hopefully this will be a nice way of kind of expanding on some of the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. And I just wanted to end by saying thanks to you as well, because, you have a community of, I'm no doubt, people listening to this podcast, but beyond that reach, you have a fantastic network of EFL supporters and experts and analysts. And I am incredibly fortunate. It's making my job at least some percentage points easier being able to tap into that resource. So thank you.
Our absolute pleasure. Yeah, Dan is on the NTT20 squad, which is a hell of a thing. Got people very excited, and they, as you guys will have really bought into his journey so far doing the 92. We will talk to you again soon. I think I like the idea of doing a manager special. We can kind of try and build some themes throughout the season as well to keep each time that we chat really interesting and engaging for the listeners, and mix it up a bit. You have already spent time with and written up interviews with Danny Rowe, with Rob Edwards. There will be one coming out soon with Tom Cleverley, the Watford manager, as well. And I think if we bunch some of those manager interviews together, it'd be a really interesting way of discussing management as a whole, managing a championship team as a whole and an EFL team, and kind of picking at some of the threads there. So if that sounds good with you, Dan, we'll get you back on in very, very shortly.
Absolutely, yeah. The only question is obviously the Daniel Storey doing the 92 sack race, who I managed to scupper first with my interview. So I'm focusing on the success stories at the moment, very selfishly.
Yeah. And I mentioned inews.co.uk is where I've been reading the pieces. Is there any extra detail that you'd like to let the listeners know about where, how they can be involved and kind of buy into this exciting year that you've got ahead of you?
I mean, I'm plugging myself on every social media platform I can, but yeah, I mean, that's where the content will be. I'm more than happy that we're having a kind of regular catch up as well in audio form. It's nice to talk about it in person rather than just on keyboard. So yeah, thanks for having me and look forward to it.
Brilliant. Well, you all know where to find the stuff. I can't over exaggerate what a joy it is to read such high quality EFL focused content, telling the stories and kind of scratching the surface in a way that just does not exist in very many other places and other outlets. So thanks to Daniel for coming on. Thank you very much to you guys for listening. Please let us know what you think about this and what you'd like us to chat about going forward as well. Thanks and go well.